39,000 people who are homeless, right, were brought in over that period of time.
Wow, in 3 days.
Yeah, and we're now in this situation where we've never known more about how to end homelessness, but it's never been worse. We've managed to get our criminalization abolished. People say, oh, that's not going to reduce homelessness. I'm like, no, you don't understand. This changes the frame of the whole thing. It chips away what's required to see someone going through hell as an equal human being. So we saw some of the ingredients there of a future without homelessness, but it's all gone completely the wrong direction. If anything frustrates me more than anything else, it's that no one even wants to talk about that lesson, because we kept people from evictions,
right.
People had enough money to pay their rent, landlords treated people differently. Guess what? That tends to help. Because our overall politics is in a complete state of chaos.
Right.
They're only ever going to be able to do a small amount of social change.
Right.
How do you get them to pick homelessness? So I said, well, what made you pick? And he said, oh, that was simple. A bunch of people showed me it could be done.
Rough sleeping in the UK just hit its highest level on record, and so has nearly every other measure of homelessness, including the number of children in temporary accommodation. Today I'm joined by Matt Downie, Chief Executive of Crisis. Crisis is a national charity for people experiencing homelessness, combining hands-on support with research and policy work aimed at ending rough sleeping altogether. Matt and I talk about what's working, what's not working, what other countries are doing, both good and bad, and how Crisis and others in the United Kingdom are working to prevent and solve rough sleeping. Whether you're in Canada, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in the United States, the affordable housing crisis is skyrocketing homelessness. You need to watch and listen to this podcast. Matt, so good to see you.
Been a while.
It's been some time.
Yeah.
I don't remember. You said Edmonton, but my last strong memory was Wales.
Well, I got two really strong memories. One is Wales and you talking to a young guy who'd been outside McDonald's who was crying about the fact that all he gets given is McDonald's to eat. And he said, I'm not hungry. I'm sick of this food. If I want some food, I want it to be something that's good for me. But mostly, I'm sick of homelessness.
Right.
And it was a wake-up call to everyone who is, who never hears the message. It's not about generosity. It's the right.
Yeah.
What do you actually need? But the thing I think may have, well, I don't know what was first or last. We had a conversation in Edmonton, and something had happened that blew my mind there, which is that here in the UK, when the temperatures go below zero, there is at least some kind of emergency assistance for people. But in Edmonton, it has to be below minus 30, which is, as far as I'm concerned, that's just a death sentence. So minus 29 is fine. I think I was talking to you about that because my head was screwed by that.
Yeah, the gentleman's name was Andy.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting about this story is that people like to give food. A homeless person will sit there. I've seen it they've had multiple meals, like they'll have a McDonald's meal and a Burger King meal at their feet, and people still bring them more food. It's like they got food, they don't have housing.
Yeah.
People, for whatever reason, are great at giving a hamburger, and if somebody's hungry, feed them. But we need to fix why they're hungry and why they're sleeping outside.
Yeah. It says so much, doesn't it? Because actually he was saying, this food is shit. I don't want to eat this.
Yeah.
Like I've got my own standards.
Good memory.
Because I'm sat here, it doesn't mean I don't have standards, really amazing.
I actually just posted the video again on Instagram, and so it's a little bit in my memory, but, one of the things he said was, people ask me these questions. Why are you sleeping rough? Because I had problems in my life. Well, why don't you go someplace to sleep? There's no place to go. I mean, come on. That's why people are outside.
Yeah.
Crisis, you're the chief exec now. Mm-hmm. Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
been for a while, right? You were the leaders in narrative change. In fact, your research with frameworks was very much cutting edge. You're way ahead of the time.
Yeah, thank you. And it's in many ways, kind of one of the, as the numbers of people experiencing homelessness have gone up, you can't claim any success. It's really frustrating to work in this territory and see things get worse. But there are some things that have changed, and one of them is that you're starting to see more and more organisations be very, very conscious of how they describe the issue. I watch, lots of charities here will have corporate partnerships with a, supermarket or this or that.
Yeah.
And when you see a homelessness organisation have a partnership and the corporate entity is describing homelessness in ways that have come directly from that, it makes me very proud. Also, we have a thing here where Prince William is doing stuff on homelessness. And when he stood up and did his initial kind of proclamations and speeches about it, he and his team very much used the exact kind of, so I mean, even some of the same metaphors that we developed and all the rest of it. And I've always thought that the homelessness sector is just talking to itself. You need bigger megaphones. You need people that normal citizens actually listen to. So whether or not you're a monarchist, Prince William gets listened to. And I watched him a couple of years ago do this speech about homelessness, which was like a sort of framing masterclass. And I thought, this is good. And probably what it means is, in the undetected world of how public, the ways people think about homelessness on a subtle level begin to shift. So if that's done any good, then we'll have done something useful.
Oh no, it was the report. One of the things that really still sticks out, I haven't read it in a long time. I mean, when did you guys bring me into Wales? When did you do Cardiff, Wales?
That was 2018.
2018.
Yeah.
So 8 years ago, right?
Yeah.
It was a long time ago, and that was around when the report came out.
Yeah.
So I haven't read it in a while. And one of the things that, and I'm going to paraphrase, is the report said the stereotypes or the strong negative paradigms that people hold on to about rough sleeping and homelessness are the strongest. They're deeply rooted than anything else.
That's right.
About poverty, about sleeping rough.
Yeah.
That they're so deeply rooted, these negative paradigms.
Yeah. And that the people that were doing the work are not homelessness specialists. They'd worked on almost all social issues, over the years. When they were looking at the results, they were saying, we think there's something wrong in our interpretation here, because all we're seeing is the deepest stereotyping and kind of singular lens that we've ever seen on anything. It's not just that people don't think homelessness happens, relatively speaking, to lots of people. They think it only happens to middle-aged older men with alcohol problems or addiction problems who've basically brought it on themselves. And that is, of course, the big insight that knocked us all for six at that point was, they said, could you show us your materials over the last however many years you've got them as a sector, fundraising materials, blah, blah, blah. And of course, who are the people that have given the general public that kind of mental shortcut?
Right.
It's us.
It's us.
It's us.
It's us.
And I'll tell you one thing, Mark. So that was a kind of thundering kind of jolt to the way our sector communicates. But there were one or two organisations that realised that the vast majority of the organisations were shifting, and so instead they doubled down on the stuff that was going in the wrong direction for fundraising purposes.
Right.
I won't name the organisations.
No, you don't.
But they have a special place in my heart.
Yeah, one of the problems is communications and messaging often is underneath fundraising.
Yes.
And it's a different audience.
Yes.
And I get it. You have to raise money.
Yeah.
If you don't raise money, you can't do the work.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a significant need to raise money, but we're often communicating in a way that hurts efforts to get housing for people, or to fix the affordable housing crisis, or just to get basic support to change policy.
Well, I am worried about that for years, thinking, have we basically just cut off our own ability to raise the money to do the things that we want to do?
Yeah.
But about 6 months ago, we started to put out some communications about the fact that our organisation is going to start buying houses and giving them to people who are homeless, right?
Yeah.
And
we'll get to that in a second.
And it immediately triggered something in the public responses we were getting, which said, well, that's a bloody good idea. Some donors started, without us even asking for money, saying, can we support that? And so it's given me renewed hope that all along, honesty was probably the right policy, and just actually say what's going on, what you need money for, what you don't need money for, and the fact that we need to switch off from a kind of
authenticity,
guilt-ridden communications.
One of the highlights of my, I don't want to call it a career.
Why not? It's a career.
But one of the highlights of the 17 years that I've been doing Invisible People is that after you did the framework, you looked around to say, who's doing this? Who's doing the messaging right? And Invisible People. And then you brought me into Wales to speak, but you also brought me in to teach your storyteller. I think his name was George at the time. That was 8 years ago. And it was really an honor that you did this cutting edge, amazing research on narrative change, first of its kind, looked around and said, oh, Invisible People is the only, let's see how we can partner together.
And I think that's to be honest, I think that's got to be the spirit of everything we all do on homelessness. That we don't we've all got finite time here. Let's work out who's doing good stuff, steal it from them, borrow it,
right,
improve on it. That's it. I mean, our own organisational positions, logos don't matter. If you're an actual human being experiencing homelessness, it matters even less.
You brought up, in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a tradition, principles before personalities. And it probably means a lot of different things to different people. But for me, it always means that, if somebody you might not like, right? I like to say I'm not going to go bowling with them, but they're doing good work helping homeless people. I'll support them. It's not about personalities. It's the principle. We have to work together. And so often we get into cliques where we're not working together, and that hurts all of our efforts.
It definitely does, and in every single direction you can be picked off. A policymaker can say, oh, so you've got a tiny disagreement with this organisation about the exact level of housing benefit that should be paid. You can't agree amongst yourselves, off you both go. That happens all the time. People switch off. Roughly speaking, in the UK, about £400 million is raised through the general public every year. That's not really changed. What's changed is we've become fiercer in our competition for it. The instinct to say, hold on a second, how could we grow that? Because homelessness has grown, have we not noticed? That's hard fought for. I'd say at the moment we appear to have an outbreak of peace and collaboration in our sector, and it's not before time. And we need more and more of it because things are not going in the right direction.
My brain cells are coming back because it was at your event in Wales, and it wasn't one of your staff. It was, I don't know if it was a local politician or another charity, but it was the first time I heard the nonprofit Hunger Games.
Yes.
It was that way, and it was wow, that's right.
So I really like the idea of the mindset being we're always in a startup mode. So our organisation is 59 years old, and we're doing some things that we've never done before. And I think quite often saying to people, let's continue to imagine this is our kitchen table moment where we start the organisation. What do we want to do? What do we want to do differently? What do we want to challenge? What do we want to prove? Who do we want to partner with? Because there's a freedom to that mindset that institutionalisation beats out of people. Nobody came to work for Crisis with that institutionalisation. It suddenly arrived at some point. So it doesn't matter who you are, you've got to work together.
As I travel, one of the things people ask me the most is, how is homelessness different? Like, how is it different in Canada? How is it different in the UK? And my response after traveling is not the difference, it's the similarities.
Yes.
Because it really all comes back to affordable housing.
Yes, it does.
And why people are sleeping outside is Canada has an affordable housing crisis. The UK has affordable housing crisis.
Yep.
So obviously America has an affordable housing crisis.
Yep.
Bring me up to date. We haven't talked in 8 years. What's going on with homelessness in London, in the UK?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. What's going on? Yeah. So, I mean, on the top of it, the numbers are universally the highest on record. As of a few weeks ago, the latest rough sleeping stats came out, and they were the highest on record. We knew that, we could see it and all the rest of it. Also, the numbers of children in temporary accommodation, or every metric you look at, is now at the highest level. There are differences underneath that. So, for example, back in, 8 years ago, we still had a rough sleeping population that was disproportionately Eastern Europeans, in London especially. That's really changed since Brexit. So, I'm not in favour of Brexit myself, but it did something to our rough sleeping population. And effectively, the European migrant rough sleeping population has been replaced with the next set of refugees and asylum seekers who are let into the country from Eritrea, Sudan, Iran, Somalia, and so it's changed the profile, but the numbers are relatively similar. Obviously, the big thing that happened was the pandemic in the middle of it. So there's a lot of attention that was paid on the fact that the rough sleeping population pretty much disappeared over a 3-day period. But actually, do you want to describe what happened?
Yeah. I mean, if all of a sudden 3 days, there's nobody outside.
Yeah. So we had so when our lockdown was being put together, I'd had a conversation with Louise Casey, who you'll remember she's this kind of shit kicker that's brought in by different governments to do things, and she's done some good things on homelessness and was brought back in on homelessness, and she was saying, look, the homelessness sector are really worried. The last people that were going to be brought into a lockdown are people with nowhere to live, and so she did this amazing thing where she just wrote a letter to every local council, which is the way we describe our local government, to say, right, I want you to bring everyone, this is a Wednesday, I want you to bring everyone off the streets by Saturday.
And they did it?
And they did it. They did it.
Oh my, so we can solve homelessness?
Yeah. 39,000 people were brought in over that period of time.
Wow, in 3 days?
Yeah. And 39,000 people who... it wasn't just people immediately visibly sleeping rough. You discovered that all these people were in transient kind of accommodation that went with their job in a restaurant or whatever. Chinatown emptied out and all these people were homeless, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And people were not housed, they were accommodated.
Right.
So lots and lots and lots of people were in hotels. Yeah. But nevertheless, as a vision of action, because all of a sudden it was not okay to be homeless, not because you didn't have a roof over your head, but because there was a deadly disease on the loose.
Right.
I mean, use whatever you can is my
right.
But it led to extraordinary action, and in some places it did translate into, well, actually, why not put people into homes, not hotels, and let's see how that goes. And some amazing things happened, but by and large, it just went steadily back to the situation that we'd had before. Everyone emerged in this fog of, so it is possible, but we're choosing to make it impossible again because there's a vaccine, or whatever. But on top of that, what we also had was a set of policies that said, well, actually, we don't want people being evicted whilst there's COVID, so let's stop the evictions, or let's slow down the evictions. Right. And actually, we want people to be able to pay their rent and not fall into homelessness. So let's slightly up the kind of benefit levels people get, etc., etc. And actually, that was the much more impressive thing to me, is that the flow of people into homelessness stopped.
Right.
And if anything frustrates me more than anything else, it's that no one even wants to talk about that lesson, because we kept people from evictions.
Right.
People had enough money to pay their rent. Landlords treated people differently.
Yeah.
Guess what? That tends to help.
Yeah. As homelessness grows, People are getting frustrated and they're pushing for laws that criminalize homelessness, which will only make the problem worse. Invisible People reaches more people, educating them on homelessness than all other homeless sector nonprofits and campaigns combined. But we do it on a limited budget. We don't have the funding they do. We are mostly funded by individual donations. And now that the economy is struggling, individual donations are disappearing, and we need you. I get it. You might not have the money to donate. Many people are struggling right now. Please share our content, share our videos. It really matters. And if you do have some funds and want to help be part of the solution to solve homelessness, please visit invisiblepeople.tv/donate. Our important work stops without you.
Landlords treated people differently.
Yeah.
Guess what? That tends to help.
Yeah.
So we saw some of the ingredients there of a future without homelessness, but it's all gone completely the wrong direction. And we're now in this situation where we've never known more about how to end homelessness, but it's never been worse.
Yeah. And why?
My view is that if we're really honest as a group of people that care about this, we're losing the political battle.
Yeah.
We're losing. I was recently in Japan, and I don't know if you've been to Japan, have you?
Not yet.
You really must go.
Okay. Ready? Alex?
You really
Aaron?
must go. It's cheap when you get there.
Yeah?
Anyway.
When you get there?
Yeah, it's expensive to get there. But anyway, I realised as I went to Tokyo, Kyoto, all these other places, I couldn't see anyone who was homeless. Yeah. And I don't mean not many people, I mean no one.
Right.
And I looked into it, and in 2000, they had around 20,000 people sleeping rough. So they did have the problem.
Right.
And guess what they did? They boosted their affordable housing supply to where it needed to be.
Yeah.
They introduced the kind of their version of housing first, matched with employment stuff, and I hadn't realised that on top of Finland and a bit of Denmark, and we have another big example in Japan that we ought to be pointing to. And when you see that, you realise that just as a political campaigner, we just haven't won yet. We just haven't won. I mean, you guys are going in the wrong direction. We're
fast.
We're kind of flatlining.
Yeah.
But we must remember that out there in the rest of the world, there is a revolution going on in homelessness.
Well, you bring up a very good point because, and you might have seen it, it's one of our most popular documentaries. We went to Finland, and it was interesting because, BBC and NPR and CBC and all, New York Times, everybody went to Finland, housing first. And that played a big part of it. But it was really their commitment to affordable housing, to preventing homelessness from happening in the first place.
Yeah.
Why they were having a reduction 12 years in a row, which is miraculous. And now it's going back up because they have a political change.
Yeah.
And, right there, that's the issue. And it's the people, that political change is complaining about homelessness, yet they're influencing policy that makes it worse.
I have a theory on this.
Okay.
So first of all, it's worth saying that. So I spoke to some of my dear friends in Finland recently. You're right; they're all kind of absolutely traumatized by the wrong political decisions being made. I said, but can I just check what numbers you're on? So, for example, how many families are homeless? And my good friend from Finland said to me, 75. I said, what do you mean? 75,000? 7,500? No, 75.
Right.
So it is getting worse, but let's be clear, you could probably point at 75 families from outside your window in London who are going through homelessness.
Yeah.
But my theory is that they went about their business on resolving this in such a Finnish way of modesty, of never really explaining it or selling it into their population. In fact, I remember talking to some of their teams who would say, what we do is we have a dispersed apartment here for somebody who used to be homeless, but we don't tell the neighbours. We don't want to fuss, blah, blah, blah. And it adds up to the fact that they took us to the kind of the absolute cusp of what it could look like to be a homelessness-free country. but they didn't sell in the concept to their own country.
Back to the framework research, back to the not educating the public.
Yeah.
And this is where we did it in the States, and you said here it's our fundraising kind of reinforced harmful stereotypes.
Yeah.
This was just a lack of education that, we had a homelessness problem, we've been solving it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the natural modesty and silent determination of that culture, where it meets homelessness policy, is a problem.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And if you have contact, I don't know if she'll put this in, but if you have contacts in Japan, it's something that, or even Denmark or any place else, we've been looking at.
Well, Denmark's really worth looking at as well. They're the next best after Finland and Japan in terms of the government really, they've got what they need to do. They haven't quite worked out exactly how to make it work.
Yeah.
So, for example, they did this thing where they said to all the kind of traditional hostel providers, part of the problem is you keep people in your places too long and you institutionalize them.
Shelters.
So we're going to cap the amount of funding you get so that after 3 months you have to have someone move on into a home of their own.
Wow.
So you're not going to get any funding unless you sign up to that.
Right.
And that was too bold. I'm told that they couldn't quite make that work, but they've got the idea.
Right.
They've got the idea, and I think that's very similar here. That kind of the wonderful organisations who've been doing brilliant stuff in some cases for 200 years.
Right.
Are almost proud at how long people stay with them, rather than really saying like, we should be avoided at all costs.
Right. Shelters do not end homelessness. Shelters are a critical part of a system and a solution when you connect that with outreach and housing as a pass-through, but it should not be the end stop.
Well, and we should judge our system change on homelessness by how much we reduce our shelter provision.
Yeah.
It should be a matter of joy and celebration. Yeah. And it really worries me to see a few years ago, like the mass shelters being opened in places like Toronto and stuff like that, when, the evidence is so clear now. It really is it's clear as day. And as everyone who's ever been through homelessness has ever said, of course I don't want to spend months and years in that situation. Of course I don't.
Yeah.
Just listen to people, they'll tell you.
You brought up something, a bold idea, and I know this would never work. Logistically, people need funding to keep going, right? To do what they're doing. But I've always thought, if you could make the significant portion of funding after somebody is in housing for 2 years.
Yeah.
Right? That would be a massive incentive.
Yep.
To change everything.
Yeah.
And first off, I have to clarify this. The issue is the lack of affordable housing. In the States, I don't know what's happening here. It's the first time I've talked to anybody. Is for every person that's getting off the streets into housing, another 2 are entering into homelessness.
Yeah.
So there's 19,000 new people each and every week, and that's numbers old, so it's much.
In the States?
In the 19,000 every week.
Good grief.
And it's probably significantly higher, and that is the issue. It's, it's housing retention is important, making shelters housing focused is important. Outreach, connecting with people is important, but if we don't fix the inflow, if we don't fix the affordable housing crisis, it's dancing madly backwards.
It is, yeah, and I think that the part of the thing that's always bothered me about the vast, what we call industrial complex of homelessness, is that it's God's work. To be doing it, whether or not it's effective, is to be something that's celebrated, right?
Right.
And that is not, in my mind, just not valid. Certainly anymore. I think when Crisis first started doing kind of Christmas night shelters in the late 60s, early 70s, you might have got away with that because there were no big evidence models of how.
Right.
Common sense might have still told you, but there we go. But now you cannot get away with that, and I think all avenues should really lead to us saying, well, we know that sufficient affordable housing and housing benefits if you need them, and particularly the cohorts of people that experience it again and again, we know what programs prevent homelessness. If you haven't got those, you're not even at the starting line, and you're not credible when it comes to doing something on homelessness. Funding things which are seen to make you busy is not a plan. Counting up the numbers of people that you've helped when you don't say actually double the number have come in, as you say, is not a plan and should not be celebrated. And it should be okay to say that what we're doing, we need to be self-critical here as well, what we're doing so far isn't good enough. It should be okay to say that.
Oh my gosh. So I don't know if you watched or listened to our last podcast with Ian. The theme that's ongoing, and you've been saying it a couple of times, I didn't know if I should go here, but you've said it so much I have to, is that, in the United States, and a lot of it has been driven by fundraising. We're ending homelessness, we're ending homelessness, we're ending homelessness, we're ending homelessness. There's over 19,000 communities, and only a few, like less than 10, actually have a reduction. And even fewer have consecutive reductions. Like you could say, they reduced homelessness 3 years in a row. So we're not, and back to the public too, we're the public is seeing homelessness grow with their own eyes. So where I'm going with this, and what we discussed in the last podcast, is we need new metrics. We need new success metrics. Because it's important to celebrate milestones.
Yes.
It's important to be encouraged and to measure, hey, we're moving forward. And as Ian put it, yes, ending homelessness is the moral obligation. That's why we're doing this work. But we have a perfect storm of homelessness coming with automation killing jobs. The affordable housing crisis isn't getting... So saying that we're going to end homelessness in my lifetime is not really realistic. And I think people know that. So sector-wise, we need a new way to celebrate that we're moving forward, that we're having, actual measurable results that reduce homelessness. But just claiming we're ending homelessness, shoving it down the public's throat. So many charities, we're ending. No. And the other thing is they're cooking the books, right? They say we have a reduction in unsheltered homelessness, but they're hiding it. Right? It's not that those people are in housing; they're in some kind of temporary accommodation. You know what I mean? They're either in a shelter, or they call it tiny homes is the big thing now. They call them. They're really a shack for lawnmowers.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think the spirit of injecting some enthusiasm and hope into this as a cause is sort of the opposite of what I was saying in terms of, well, we'll just be here forever with our night shelter. But back to what we were talking about at the start, there's you can be honest with the public as well. You can say, well, look, here at Crisis this week, we ended the homelessness of 6 people, and my God, we're proud of it because they were going through hell, those 6 people, where there's a queue behind them, and unless we tackle the structural reasons and government does its bit, we're going backwards. By the way, however, can we point you to this town in Yorkshire where we've got the numbers of kids in temporary accommodation down, and they're using the money they save to prevent homelessness? Hasn't solved everything, but it's really important. Go have a look. You can just be honest with people. I think though that it's I've spoken to Community Solutions about how they've reached their own conclusion that until in really big cities big reductions in visible homelessness are seen, no one will believe the other stuff in smaller communities.
Yeah.
And so they're there with that conclusion anyway. And I think that's it goes back to the stereotype.
Yeah.
Because people don't see the system behind the kind of thing that's in front of them.
Yeah.
The subhuman individual in front of them. They don't see the system behind that. So you've got to sort of engage with the public where they are. But I do want to defend for a bit the value of utopianism and kind of because otherwise you get what we've got now, which is our government strategy, which is a sort of, I thought there was a page missing from it when I read it. I was like, where's the bit where you say what you want?
Right.
It's just a list of activities, some of which are great, but it's just a list of activities, and I can't really see what bright new dawn they're trying to point towards whatsoever. And I think sometimes ultra realism can take you back to being quite fatalistic.
Oh yeah, we need balance.
Yeah.
We know how to solve homelessness.
Yeah.
We need to keep fighting.
Yeah.
We need to keep pushing. I'm just saying we need to be more authentic.
Well, and the other danger, of course, and you know this better than me, is that once you start giving the message or letting the message be that it can't be ended, then our friends' criminalization and persecution start coming in.
Yeah. No, and you brought up a good point, because I don't think we should say we can't that because we can. We shouldn't say we can't because we can end homelessness.
Yeah.
We need to be very careful with that framing. And I wish I had some money to research this. I think we need to be honest with people, is saying, homelessness is growing. The lack of affordable housing, lack of a living wage, racism. Homelessness is a symptom, not a cause.
Yeah.
We know how to solve homelessness. We just lack the political and public will to do it. And that's where we need your help.
Yeah.
We can do it.
Yeah.
But just what I'm maybe not framing it correctly, communicating it correctly, is just coming out and saying, we're ending homelessness, it works against us, because then the public sees people. We can end homelessness instead of we ended homelessness.
Well, it can become laughable. I remember we used to have a cafe you probably came to in our service up the road, and in it the people that ran the cafe would put, this orange juice ends homelessness, this flapjack ends homelessness. And I'm like, please stop doing that. Yeah. A, that's really kind of throwaway and kind of, and B, it's not credible.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I was going to ask you a question about kind of. So you're obviously steeped in an understanding that homelessness is secondary to kind of institutional racism, particularly in the States. But there are different countries with different flavors of the things that are actually under the bonnet, as we say here. When I went to Canada, I realised that actually homelessness is secondary in many cases to the unresolved kind of disgraceful treatment of Indigenous communities.
Right.
So that's the issue, really, and it's sort of the homelessness is the expression of much of it. In this country, a lot of it is, it's still kind of the class system. It's still kind of, well, if you're poor, really, it's your fault, and you're always going to be poor.
Deserving poor.
Yeah, all of that stuff. Have you learned anything going to different countries about how that's sort of, people actually name that or
Really good question, and bringing in Canada and the United States, because in the United States, it's Black people, brown people, people of color, Indigenous people are disproportionately homeless because there was structural racism. If you look at Canada, very similar, just it's not so much Black people as it is Indigenous cultures.
Yes.
I did a lot of work in Canada. Tim had me go to 24 cities in Canada.
Yeah.
And it changed me. Because I didn't know anything about residential schools.
Oh my God.
And learning about the atrocities to kids And the United States had residential schools too, and I know Australia and some other places have. But to your point, I mean, it changed me in many different ways, and it just destroyed the culture. It's unthinkable the abuses that would happen. And I was tasked, how do I tell this story? I'm a white guy from the United States.
You're
I'm
not
a
really-
Yank from
yeah, exactly.
So what I did, which is very unique to how I work, is the voice of lived experience. Is I amplified that story by interviewing people that went through residential schools, or that are suffering, or their parents went through it, and they're out on the streets, so the indigenous culture, giving them a voice to amplify it. But also very unique, and it's back to what we were just talking about, is I think it's important that we scream really loud about the crisis that's happening, but we have to do it with some kind of hope. And so when we talk about a crisis like Indigenous homelessness, what I did was also interview people that are working to help solve Indigenous homelessness. If you watch our documentaries on the criminalization of homelessness in the United States, which is growing and it's horrible, we always put in stories of housing as a solution, as an alternative to criminalization. Because criminalization shouldn't exist. It's extremely expensive to taxpayers, and it only makes homelessness worse. So whenever we talk about a crisis, whether it be Indigenous homelessness or criminalization, we also try to frame solutions.
Yeah. By the way, one thing that has happened since you were last here is we've managed to get our criminalization abolished.
That's right. It was like an 1800 law.
Yeah.
What was the law again?
It's called the Vagrancy Act.
The Vagrancy Act.
And it dates back to even further.
Okay. I knew it was.
But it is one of those things that it's just a privilege to have been sort of around at the time when it finally happened. I was given a file from the campaigners who started the campaign in the 1980s and failed. They had letters from Tony Blair saying, no, we're keeping it. When I met the historians, they told me about Churchill's attempts to get rid of it in the 1930s, and he failed. So we've got an event coming up, hopefully in a few weeks' time, to celebrate this and bring together people from all walks of life who've done something. And it's really interesting. Journalists will say, well, that's not going to reduce homelessness. I'm like, no, you don't understand. This changes the frame of the whole thing.
Yeah.
So if you see this as something that can be criminalized, you open up the kind of othering we've talked about, the stereotyping. So it chips away what's required to see someone going through hell as an equal human being, and really proud of that one. And actually, that it was, it wasn't one single organisation; it was hundreds.
Yeah. No, congratulations.
So I'm available for hire if you want to talk
come
about
on
how to
over.
scrap homelessness criminalisation in the States.
If you had the magic, we'd bring you over.
God, that just looks bleak. I saw a PowerPoint presentation of Trump's camp he's trying to build in Salt Lake City or something.
It's it's not. The administration has something to do with it, but it's bigger than Trump. It's this ideology that is sweeping across the country, and I understand the public's frustrated, but criminalization is not the solution. Because you put somebody in jail, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, it depends on what state. In California, it's $152,000 per year per inmate. And when they come out of jail, they have a criminal record and can't get a job. So it perpetuates homelessness and makes it worse, yet they continue to push for this stuff. And they talk about framing. They're very good at it. They frame it as a compassionate response.
Yeah.
Oh, we know housing is the right move, and it just takes forever, and we can't let them sleep on the sidewalk. So we have to force them into treatment, or we have to force them where forced treatment is proven not to work. And even there's not enough treatment for people who voluntarily want to go in.
Yeah.
It's just a path to lock people up, and it makes no sense. And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, some of us saw it coming, but we didn't talk about it because it was so insane. And now they're literally trying to build forced camps for homeless people instead of working on solutions that we know will work.
So the question is, and as a expert communicator, how did we lose? Why are we not winning on the big battles in terms of not just individual policies, but the narrative work, the framing work, the kind of the next generation of politicians who will make decisions about this? How do we get a different context into their head? I've sent loads of politicians over to Finland, and it's an expensive way of doing it. It's not sustainable.
Right.
And actually, if you just go and see an absence of something, it doesn't really tell you enough. Right. We do need more smart ways of building a political kind of next generation that can see this as solvable, don't you think?
Oh, so in the United States, there's like Prager University, which has a $75 million a year budget. It does 50 videos a week. Not just homelessness. It's just right-wing ideology. Homelessness is part of it. And they're even in schools in 7 states. They're smart. They're going for the kids to teach them all this hate and this propaganda. And then you have, it's probably American culture. I mean, you can type in Kensington, Philadelphia into YouTube, and there's 9 live cameras of cameras pointed at people using drugs. Oh. And there's, YouTubers, because they make $200,000 a month filming this negative content, and it spreads. More people watch YouTube than anything else.
Yeah.
And then you have frustrated citizens. Then you add the negative propaganda that's often funded by bad actors, and you put it all together in click-hungry media.
Sure.
We're being overwhelmed by negative paradigms, and that is a big piece of it. And then on our side, there's just not... Right-wing funders have seen this. I mean, right-wing funders fund an organization for 10 years, 20 years. They say, oh yeah, push ideology to people, to kids, sure, here's millions of dollars. And our side doesn't even see the importance of it yet. You are one of the first that actually went and did research on narrative change, and you did it the right way. I think there's still, again, back to crisis and hope, I believe there's some hope. I believe people are starting to see, and it's not so much just the nonprofit sector, it's also the Democrats, right? There's just been there's something about right-wing media, they're all uniform in their message. They all say the same thing, they know their message works, and they spread it. We're all over the place. Right? And we can't agree on anything, and we won't fund messaging or the channels that actually work. We reached over 400 million people last year.
Did you?
On a tiny budget. And it's still just me. I can't get money to hire somebody else, right? I'm lucky to have producer Aaron and producer Alex, but they're freelance. I'm sinking because I can't hire anybody. We're reaching people by mass, but it's not enough. And there's millions of dollars being spent on narrative change. It's just outdated strategies that don't work. So,
yeah.
What do you think?
I sort of think there's if I was in the States, I would feel very, very bleak, I have to say. I think I'm always trying to tell a story here, which is that in relative terms, yeah, the numbers are high, but they're still well within the solvable bucket. And here are some stories of when remarkable things happened. And by the way, some of them were just a few years ago. Remember that time? Oh, yeah. The bit that's missing for me is that because our overall politics is in a complete state of chaos, and the sort of the populist right are on the march here as well, although I think some of what's gone on recently has damaged some of our populist right through association with Trump. But they're on the march, and that tends to mean that things that are... So populism is the opposite of working out how to solve a problem and being realistic that it'll take time. It's stupid promises about what can be delivered with no effort whatsoever. So populism would say, homelessness can be solved, stop the immigrants and arrest people. Next,
Right.
We don't need more housing. That's nonsense. Whatever it might be. So for me, it's about the long-term work. I want to know who the parliamentary candidates for 10 years' time are. Where are they? Who are they hanging out with? What are they reading? Yeah. How do we get in on the message carriers that really matter for our issue? Put ourselves in the background and put in the foreground people who talk human to the general public. And also, one of the reasons that we're about to start providing housing directly, and one of the reasons to do that is to sort of demonstrate the system change you want to exist. Right. I mean, we don't have the money to provide all the housing for even the people that we see. But what we can do is imagine I could tell you 1,000 stories of people who would have otherwise got no housing whatsoever, may have died on the streets, and certainly whose lives would have been completely written off. And here they are now. Look at the potential, look at the relationships, look at the work they're doing, look at how wonderful these people are. Yeah. I sort of make a really, really big point to show it costs less, communities benefited, and obviously the human beings benefited too. I feel like all of that's still on offer to us. And actually the more sharp the risk, the more sharp we've got to be to not waste any energy on anything that's not going to persuade people.
I call it personal benefit messaging. I actually did some research and developed a toolkit. It's interesting when I have these ideas and then I fund somebody to go research it. I always have anxiety because what if they come back and say, "Oh, you're full of shit," right? Because I could be, right? And they came back and they said, "You're right, but." So there's this altruistic messaging that works for a demographic and personal benefit messaging that works. And it's you said it. You led with tax savings. I don't know if tax savings resonates with the public because they're so frustrated with homelessness. They're willing to pay police, which they know is higher taxes. But then you said community. You said community safety. Yeah. There's that's really big. And if you look at the former housing minister for Finland, who is also former mayor of Finland, we interviewed in our documentary, and we asked him about housing first. And not once did he say that homeless person has a better life. What he said was the community is safer. This community is cleaner. It's better for business. It's better for tourism. Not once did he say Jim can shower, Mary can brush her teeth, and Jose can go to school now. Yeah. Not once. And he was center right, so he's not quite Donald Trump, but he's close. And he got the whole country to embrace housing first. And how did he do it? Personal benefit messaging.
Well, so I met that guy once as well.
Yeah.
Jan?
Yeah.
And he also said to me that, I said to go back to your sort of foundational moment on it. Why on earth? You don't have that background. How come? And he said it was quite simple. We knew that when we came into government, we would have to choose 2 or 3 things to really double down on. And so when we chose the things we chose, we would be saying no to other people. So the people that came to us, and the example he gave was, he said, There were lots of issues for people with disabilities in Finland, but we chose first of all to solve homelessness. So that was a real slap in the face for me for kind of how we consider this, because what he's effectively saying is every political decision maker, no matter what their politics are, they're only ever going to be able to, do a small amount of social change.
Right.
How do you get them to pick homelessness? So I said, well, what made you pick? And he said, oh, that was simple. A bunch of people showed me it could be done.
Wow.
Yeah. And the bunch
Wow.
of people are people I consider my professional heroes.
Yeah.
So the lead advocate for the kind of housing in civil society, the guy who was the lead civil servant, who's just an extraordinary man. Particularly those two, they in their very quiet Finnish way, just sort of, if we sort of said to each municipality, we really got to shift away from night shelters. By the way, you're not going to get any more housing for that. The money for that, it has to be this, blah, 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 blah. Minister, we can do this. Like, oh, okay. Yeah. We choose homelessness.
So tell me something encouraging, something Crisis is doing or you're doing or somebody else, how it's influencing, reducing rough sleeping in a positive way.
Yeah. I'll give you a policy and then a practical example. So go back to Wales, which may have been the last time we met each other. We recently had a law passed in Wales that completely transforms the system towards prevention. So instead of having to wait until you turn up with your sleeping bags until somebody in the state will help you, if you can show that you're at risk of homelessness up to 6 months before it happening, every local council now has a duty to try and get you somewhere to live.
Oh, wow.
On top of that, so does prison service, hospitals, schools, and so it goes.
Yeah.
So we'll see, but that is state level prevention on a scale that we've, it's just absolutely wonderful. And it actually came from some lived experience work that said the key concept is you need to ask me what I need and then act on it. Some people ask me what I need but never do anything, and some people never ask. So we want you to ask and to act. So we now have actually on the statute book a duty. It's actually called to ask and to act, and it came from that one guy.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
So that's the policy example. And what I'd also say is that I think that on a practical level, what we've started doing is sort of saying there are a bunch of things we can't wait for other people to do. So we've set up our own lettings agency as a business, just up the road there. We're buying homes. We're taking equity stakes in small startups that might do something good on homelessness. All to say, really, that sometimes the most liberating thing is to not rely on anybody else and think, what can we do that's different?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for spending time with us.
It's been a pleasure.